Hello, everyone. So, this is our 14th podcast, and we have here our home team minus Quang. This is not the first time Quang is missing. We just have to chase him up a little bit. He's got his own podcast now. Anyway, so today we have an important topic. We will be discussing research in TESOL and the future of TESOL. Now, obviously, it's a big topic, and we only have 1 hour today. So I have 77 slides, and already have been told by Andrew Lyon not to present them, so I won't. But it is very complicated today. We've got people, we all prepare for these podcasts. So I have to say to you, having podcasts, regular podcasts, it's amazing because you're talking to real audience, people who are interested, and you really have to prepare and you have to go beyond what you know. So I today was studying all the people that I haven't looked at for 30 years. So it was interesting. So we look at the TESOL research and future. So thank you, Luvi, for coming here. Thank you, Lala, Andrew, and I'm here always. All right. So how many trends are there? And why the heck are we talking about it? So I will try to actually introduce. Every time we have big topics, so whether you do doctoral thesis or whether you do master thesis or whatever, you need to have a way to focus your topic, but not just focus. Also, to focus, you also need maybe a skill of organizing information. This is really hard, and I wouldn't expect it from younger scholars, this capacity. But I will introduce you to a way that I have developed myself for this podcast to organize thinking on my own thinking, how to approach such a big topic like trends in TESOL. I looked also at the approach that Lala will take in his little discussion. I haven't seen these yet because V has been working like until this very second. So anyway, so the idea is actually for us not just to discuss, but also not to get lost in those trends. Because otherwise it's like a sea. You can drown and still know nothing. So I looked at stuff and I thought to myself, oh my God, we've got all this vocabulary. I call it the grammar of TESOL. If Holiday calls grammar whatever he wants, I call grammar this. So what do we have? We have vocabulary, support, learning, pedagogic framework. We throw these words very often, as I learned from Andrew and then myself as a mentor, noticed hardly defining what we mean, right? So it will be important for us throughout these broadcasts to actually learn how to define things in a way that matters. And then we have all these explicit teaching and scaffolding. Everybody knows what scaffolding, just like everybody knows what's I+1. I didn't even include it, didn't have enough space. On all of those, great, it is all fantastic. We've got all this vocabulary, we have no idea what it means, but we act as if we did, because when I ask students, or mainly students, because you can't ask mature scholars difficult questions because then people get offended. So anyway, so when I ask students, for example, what things mean, then everything falls apart. The question is, as a mature scholar who has gone, if you finish your PhD, you want to write, you want to participate, how do you spot something important? You know how they say you could trip over it and you wouldn't notice? So how do you do that? It's very interesting, right? So how do you make an informed judgment about what you read? So what did I write here? Honestly, when I was preparing for today, I was thinking to myself, we've got all this terminology. It sounded to me, maybe I'm a woman, maybe Andrew would have created a radio or something, but for me it sounded like we're working on a student, like on a dough, trying to make a donut out of a student, or bread, whatever it is. So we've got all this. So our research, all we have to do in our research is identify the ingredients, work on their subject, students, and then the bread will happen. So, and then we will have our method, and we can just go and sell this method. And it is happening in TESOL, it is happening in English literacy, that people go there and flog the method. Now, wouldn't be too bad, maybe, I don't know, but I have a problem with the ingredients. And we'll have a look at that. So trends in TESOL, I was thinking to myself, how can I throw this question to our audiences and say, well, what are those trends? How do you think of trends? Do you think of it like an Irish stew, the proverbial Irish stew, or a market where you put everything in one place and you then just go like this? So basically, a market of ideas and methods that we generate profusely in the hope of one day we will be able to put the Humpty Dumpty back together, right? We got mixed up our heads, and then we'll finally, identify all the bits and pieces of the machinery, and we'll put the Humpty Dumpty together, and we will be like, God, will it not be exciting? Right, I'm sarcastic, but I think that that's one way of looking at the concept of trends and wanting to know the trends. Right, there's this market of ideas. How do you plow through it? Then this is what I identified for myself. So I didn't create the model on the right out of nowhere. Noticed I described it as a clear demarcation of the goal to serve the student. So whatever trends are there, the way I will be assessing them in order to spot the great idea, right? Not to drown in the market of ideas. So a clear demarcation of the goal to serve the student. All methods and questions revolve around the need to support the student in the learning goals. So I'm not hijacking the learning process. I'm not, as Andrew puts it, mind melding with the student. I know what you need. Because if someone, for real, someone, say neuroscientist, someone who actually knows stuff from another angle, would challenge me, it would ask me, how do you know? I wouldn't have a clue how to answer. Right. So there it's interesting. So basically notice that the arrow goes to the student. So yes, we do theoretical research, but to serve the student, our students' progress and success is the benchmark enabling us to evaluate the relevance of our theories. Because how you connect things, you can connect in 5,000 different ways in this endless universe. So the idea in TESOL is to support the student. Maybe if you do linguistics or something else, you can have at the top something else. But if you work in TESOL, the job is to support the student, not linguistics, not ideas about how to garden, right? So we have, I would say, at this very moment, and I'm very happy to be challenged, but I was thinking of two aspects here that matter, which is the theoretical research you have to support, so you develop some concepts relevant to supporting students, and also application in practice. You need to check. You need to check how well you are thinking. So, where to from here? So we know that we have this a little bit of a model now, how to think of applied or of TESOL research. Obviously, I'm not for the Humpty Dumpty model, but some of you might be. There's no one way. But it would be nice if you had it. You would justify it. I could stop here to enable you to ask some questions, or I could actually drive my little presentation here. I might drive it a little bit, and then maybe you can come back with your questions. Will be okay?
Yeah.
All right. So in order to help myself again, how to evaluate, how to spot a good idea. So first we have this notion of how to think of TESOL research. Is it supporting the student? Is it support the student as opposed to some other object? Right. So then I thought to myself, all right, so what questions would I ask when reading an article so that I can actually understand what's the intellectual framework of the researcher? Right. So I'm very happy for people who say to me, look, I am a social theory person and I do socioculturalism and I do all of that. And these are just empty words. I really need fair questions right there written that will guide me, that will enable me to produce a lengthy story about what the researcher is actually doing, and if the researcher is truly supporting the student, and then I can actually evaluate what's new here in this work. Right? Are there new questions? Are there new epistemological assumptions? Epistemology is a study of knowledge. So, what new evidence about what we know is introduced to assist us, and so on. So I have this little presentation divided into two. As I said, I'll just stick to part one at this very second, because otherwise it will be just too lengthy, although it is short, but I still will leave it with one part. So we have two people. We have Michael Rosen and we have Frances Christie. I'm not sure whether Frances Christie is still the professor in Melbourne University, but I think she's still there, and Michael Rosen. So they produced this article. So actually, Michael produced his first paper. He produced it actually as a blog. And if you read this paper, you can see that he tried very hard to violate at least some language rules. He's a naughty boy. He's an author, but also works in education, has a PhD. So Francis is very much Hallidayan systemic functional linguistics person, and I think she never really got the point of Michael Rosen's paper. But let me just show you. So I wanted to see how these questions that I identified in the previous slide will help me to read what Michael Rosen wrote, and then I compared it with Francis. I will not go to Francis at this very moment, maybe in 2 weeks, but we're start with Rosen. Let's look at Michael Rosen. So I copied some stuff from him, and what he was saying about the genre approach, what he was saying, because I'm interested in writing. I'm interested in writing from by utilizing multiplicity of sensory modalities that we have as human beings. So I thought to myself, people talk about genre, and I wanted to have a look how they do it. My students research it. So I looked at, by accident, I have no idea how I stumbled on this paper. I forgot by now. So he says here that schools are institutions with a very specific discourse about them. And what happens in those institutions, we have what we call invisible power. You enter in order to purchase knowledge, right? So you already are what they call in a sort of submissive position of authority. So someone is above you, someone will judge, right? So you already have this power based institution in which you are, into which you have entered, and it is there's this discourse about it. But what Michael Rosen is saying, if you insert into this system of invisible power a system that is essentially top-down instruction, what you will be doing is reinforcing the system of power and control and domination over pupil. Now, I've read, obviously, Frances Christie, and she has no problem with that. But look, let's follow him. He says, knowledge is presented as a given. That's what institution owns. But the student has no means to question it. And then he says, in the framework of the genre theory, education is presented as if it was owning certain kinds of knowledge use. So we own how you should be reading. Oh, own how you should be writing. Like, we know, we will give it to you. The pupil doesn't have those. That's why the pupil is in the school, right? But it's presented as not having those knowledges. So the pupil has to acquire it, and they acquire it through exercises. How else? We've been doing this for hundreds of years, right? You write something and it goes to a wastebasket. So these tasks, those rehearsal tasks, he's saying they are these tasks, writing tasks. They're basically rehearsals, just in case you need it one day. They are not real language users because they don't actually, those language tasks don't really do anything. Now, what I'm doing, I'm selecting words for you to actually understand me. Look at this, my hands are moving so that you can get the beat of it as well. So you can imagine, it's like a singer. I watch Dimash, whoever follows me on Facebook, you know I watch Dimash Kudaibergen. Dimash draws the notes, points to you. Now we're gonna go high. Now we're gonna go, breathe out or whatever. So, but he says these rehearsals are not real language users because they actually do nothing. They just exercise books for teacher to mark with a red pen or blue pen or whatever. So Michael Rosen wrote also a few questions here. What are the alternatives to genre education within schools and schooling? Good question. I'm not sure that when Lala was my student, he ever presented one. I mean, there was something from the past, but it's stuck basically now, no alternatives. He says also point two,
And yeah,
the genres we have, the genres we have invented.
Sorry to interrupt you, but could you let Andrew in because his internet connection is down?
Right. So the genre we have invented, oh, I couldn't see him because he was, all right. The genres we have invented, however, are not structures in nature. They are taught to future teachers as if they were written in stone. In fact, Moses came from the mountain, whatever the mountain was called, with the genres written on the pad or whatever he had, this right? So they present it to teachers. In fact, when I work with my future teachers, my in-service teachers, and I teach them a different way, they find it incomprehensible because they've been already molded to these 10 commandments of genre teaching. And this guy is saying, well, they haven't been written in stone. They are not deduced from empirically from nature. And then he's saying the problems arise in education that we treat these categories, the descriptors of genres, as if they are hard and fast descriptions of watertight, discrete categories. So basically, what he's saying, we treat these categories as if they were real, as if nothing else could move in between them. It is just it. And then we teach to it. All right, so just to summarize in relation to these questions, one thing I didn't want to do today is to produce my own answers to these questions. So I took the stuff that Michael Rosen wrote and put underneath in black, underneath those questions, because that's how I would have what I would have done before I write the paper, and then I would have written a longer response. But first, you really want to be true to the text because you don't want to put words into the researcher's map. So under the question, what's the problem that the research area is seeking to address, that I'm actually interested in? So writing as participation in genres, that's more or less that kind of general topic. But the problem that he's saying here is the genres we've invented are not structures in nature deduced empirically. So that's his counterpoint to the problem of teaching writing as participation in genres, or at least the way it is done today. What justifies the questions we ask, assumptions, policies, and what he's saying, well, we kind of don't know. because we have no alternatives. So basically, nothing needed justification. We just have a change. You know, we just have a change. So there are no alternatives in education within schools and schoolings. Then what's the role of the researcher in this approach? What he's saying here, well, we just teach to the letter, right? We've got these categories and we teach to the categories. So what's the role of the researcher? You just reproduce the model, and maybe but I can't see a researcher as a challenger or as questioner or as a critical thinker, because there's nothing to add. The categories are written in stone. And then who's to benefit from this research? Well, I don't know. I think that that's the question, but probably other people have written too. When I worked with uh, Hanum Pertiwi on her PhD, we actually invented this question ourselves, and I'm sure that other people invented it in front before us. But anyway, how does a child get a sense that using language is something that they are entitled to? That's the question. That's a real question to ask yourself when you, in relation to this, who's benefiting. Because if a genre people own the genre, own the types of talk or types of language users. So how does a child get a sense that using language is something that they are entitled to? That's a good question to pose. Maybe they're not entitled to use it until they actually get a tick from the teacher. So the entire problem, of course, was that genre pedagogy appeared as a liberation pedagogy. We will free you from the oppression of being poor, or of having parents that were poor and don't give you enough of vocabulary and all of that. So the way we will do it, and I'm happy for anyone to discuss it with me or with us and take an issue with Michael. The way we will do it, we will hijack the the types of language that are being used, and we will drill them into you so that you automatically will reproduce it. Like a horse, you will respond to commands. When we press this button, you will run faster. When we press this button, you will run slower. Sorry for being sarcastic, but that's pretty much what it is, or what it appears, especially in relation to the question, where is the student, and has the student to feel that they actually can use language. They own, or they're entitled to use it outside of the permission given by the school. So that's the sort of question that I came out with, and I was very pleased to see that Michael Rosen raised it in his paper. And as I said before, his oh, and they don't get it right, by the way. That I wanted to share this slide. So I looked at, like to prepare for this, I looked for at different resources. So this is a picture taken from a workshop, which is actually uh, done, I think, by Beverly Derevianka. So that's on YouTube. It's like a 2 or 3 hour workshop. If you need a link, you can find it basically on YouTube, or you can ask me. I sometimes post these things on my Facebook. So basically, the task here was for students, year 5 and 6, to produce a review. What's a review? I don't know whether you know what's a review of a book or review of a movie. But please note, after 300 different rehearsals that they went with, the different steps that these particular students went through, or children went through with their teacher, notice please that the final draft doesn't say review, it's a summary. Now beat me. It beats me. I think that the review and summary are two different genres. Review is something you write for the audience. So you identify the audience who the heck they are. You identify the modality. Will it be through on the website? Will it be in the newspaper? Will you make a presentation to someone? Will it be a letter? I don't know where it will be. You identify the audience, appropriate language, and you identify what is it that you want to pass to that particular audience for them to actually feel either excited or discouraged or indifferent about a specific movie or a book, right? Now, if you write a summary, that's exactly what Michael Rosen was talking about. You just generated a rehearsal, a little artificial task. And I have to say to you that when I teach English literacy to our pre-service teachers in Australia who will teach English literacy in schools, and I look at texts in the textbook of systemic functional linguistics, this is exactly what I get, which is artificial text produced for no audience. And yet the Australian curriculum says when you open your mouth, there is a receiver at the other end. So how you will talk, you make choices. Even Halliday talks about choices in a weird way, but he does. So if you make choices, where are so anyway, they do get it wrong, right? And we do talk in the Australian curriculum about the audience, but I couldn't say it specifically addressed in that review. So yeah, so I'll finish here, although I have now response to by I evaluated what the response to Michael Rosen, but I'll just leave it for a second from Melbourne School of Linguistics. I'll just leave it there because I don't want to overwhelm you. I think that would be okay to stay with this point. So what's the trend? The trend here is not necessarily genre pedagogy. The trend here is not necessarily writing or reading. The trend here is a model of I don't even know research because I can't see any research in it. But the model of first of all pedagogy, and maybe they do research some things like relating to process based on no real evidence about the process of learning, which is totally top down, which hijacks the learning process, hijacks the language, hijacks everything you are as a student, as a person, and they basically make the student subordinated to the language theory, right? So the student doesn't learn a language to what Anne Friedman calls exercise his or her authority over discursive situation. I make choices for you to see how well I can review this book, or so they basically produce artificial tasks written to the linguistic model, right? So the student is not on the top of that graph, right? It's a linguistic theory. Everything serves the linguistic theory. And yeah, how well can we make the student be subjugated to the linguistic theory which we are now driving into his head so that he can actually comply by the rules we've invented, those categories fixed in stone. Okay, so here I am, I'm done. If you don't have any, do you have any questions here, or would you like to come up with some?
I have a question on you. Um, how successful is genre-based approach in Australia and elsewhere, do you think, based on your observation
Experience?
in the last 3 decades?
Okay, so the problem with the genre theory is that there are no rivals, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it developed in late 80s and early 90s. In the early 90s, started to basically precipitate across Australia,
yeah.
and people built careers
Mm,
applying it. So when I looked at how people assess success, they assess success of the approach in relation to their own markers of success.
mm,
So I don't assess whether you write well, I assess whether you can do the things with the text that I expect you to do.
right.
When 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 the linguistic theory clashes with, say, how NAPLAN assessors
Mm.
assess text, right? So
Yeah.
there's a paper by Cadwell and White from 2017. I'm now writing a paper on the basis of that. So
Mm.
Cadwell and White say, well, clearly the assessors, NAPLAN assessors, were not fair and didn't assess well, didn't actually, you know, get
Mm.
the model right. So that's what they say, because linguistics is more important. They don't inquire how the NAPLAN assessors are assessing. They already
Yeah.
know that the model of assessment by the NAPLAN assessors was not complying with what the linguistic theory was. I
Mm.
also had examiners looking at Lukman, my other PhD student who's about to finish.
Yeah.
And the question then was, I'm not sure if it was posed to him, but that was present at his defense of his proposal, because we
Mm.
defend proposals in Australia. And people, finally, the question came to me, and I was asked, so your multisensory model, is it an extension of systemic functional linguistics? And
Mm.
I'm looking at them. Why does it have to be an extension? And so first they were very sort of like, we can cope with it. It's all right, Um, it's all right. We can cope with it and whatever. But when I said it's not an extension, there's a completely different tag. I could
Yeah.
feel hostility.
Mm.
So it's almost like we have extremism.
Yeah.
I don't want to use this word, but I can't think of a different one. When I mentioned that there's something else maybe possibly on the horizon, and I'm exposed to hostility. I'm not hostile to people who are doing ethnographic analysis of something. I'm not doing that. I'm not
Mm.
fighting them. Why is that? It's almost like a religion.
Yeah. And then, would you say that multisensorial load reduction strategies is the antithesis of genre-based theory in a way?
Well, in every way, because what it does, it puts the student in the center.
Yeah.
And it is also not a closed model,
Yeah.
because we are open. I mean, as it is, between the time you did your research and where I am today, the model has improved. New tools, new ways of working with the tools, new insights, new ways
Yeah.
of, right? So it's continuously breathing, because it's not the tools that are
Mm.
important, it's the students' progress. Change the
Yeah.
tools. It's the approach. Approach is supporting the student, is all we're doing. So our approach is whatever you call it, but our approach is to support the student. That's the approach.
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
approach is not to support linguistics or apply linguistics.
Mm.
So our trend in TESOL is support the student, don't
Right.
support linguistics.
Mm.
Right? If you want to look into linguistics, by all means, that's what your education is for. Look into linguistics, look into other tools, right? Like we have, what do you call it, multisensory load reduction strategies, right? So multisensory, look into, like we borrowed from Andrew, the
Yeah.
intonation, we've borrowed from Ramachandran and all these people. We borrow stuff, just borrow stuff, like your house. Your house is not just bed or kitchen. You
Mm.
bring things, when you're moving, you ask yourself, what's so much clutter about? We
Yeah.
bring
Yeah.
in things, our approach. So the trend that we're serving in TESOL, pedagogy and research, is to support the student only. And anything else is, what do they call it? Benefit. So Andrew's work, however he sees it, I see it as things came out that added knowledge to natural science.
Yeah.
Right. But that's because it emerged from supporting the student, not per se from natural science.
Yeah. And there's actually a request from my colleague last week, and he asked me if he could actually access the verbotonal stuff that we have created, because in my presentation, I mostly talk about the differences between the motions of learning between multisensorial load reduction strategies and the genre-based approach. So I'm currently analyzing the current textbooks produced by the Indonesian government. Actually, genre-based approach is still there, so still mandated in the curriculum, in the textbooks. And my focus is on the differences of motions of learning. I think we have to tell the world how the motions of learning in our approach
What do you mean?
actually
Emotions
works.
or motions? Are you saying
Motions.
both?
I mean the sequence. Let's say the motions of learning. So the genre-based approach have that building knowledge of the field, and then the modeling, and then joint construction and independent
The
construction.
question is, where did they get them from?
Right.
What
So
evidence? So what?
yes, I think we have to
I,
talk about that, Anya.
right. Well, um, do I have to address it now?
No. But maybe we have to talk later on, because our viewers need to see how different pedagogical framework actually build differences in the motions of
Okay.
learning.
So basically, you see, there will be time when we will be teaching
Yeah.
our in this podcast, we'll be teaching our skills and our knowledge, and we sort of do it a little bit. But I want to actually for our podcast to support also other researchers in the way how they develop, not necessarily to be like us, but how we even got where we are. We didn't just jump to where we are. We went through lots of steps, and these steps are what matters. So one needs to ask themselves, where did they get these steps, which was like explanation, then joint constructions, then you let that. So I do, we do, you do, right? This kind of model. Where did they get it from? Now the model genre-based approach is very old. It started developing in 87, right? So that's before a lot of understandings from neuroscience came out, right? Clearly there were some sort of studies before, but now we know more, and we know more for certain, or more certain than in the past. So the model is not updated. But the question really to ask yourself is, where did they get them from? Now, when they will say to you, oh, we do sociocultural scaffolding. Sociocultural scaffolding means I have a model of how the task is to be performed. Like, how? And I have a model of your, I have a theory of how of the needs you have in order to perform the task. So I kind of know the theory of your mind and the theory of the task, how it is to be uh, how it has to be done or completed. Now that's, you can say it maybe if you are a professor and you're old and you produce papers in journals that you practically own, you can say it, but you couldn't write it, you couldn't send this paper to neuroscience journal. Everybody would laugh at it. Like, do you have a theory of the task, how it is to be performed, and also the theory of a student's mind regarding the needs they have to perform the task? That's a big claim, right? So that's why they are so watertight, because they make these claims, we know, right? And whereas what we're saying, our model briefs, we says we don't know, we're just supporting the
Yeah.
student, we have no idea about
Right.
what's involved in the task. So that's why the student is the ultimate decider whether it works or not,
Yeah.
right? Because we have no idea. We're just hitting semi-blind, because you still work with a live person. It's like medicine. In medicine, you just give them Panadol and they die. And they're supposed to just not have a headache, and just happened that this one died. And you go like, what the heck? So your models could be right, but you kind of like, some things you are certain of, but you're not certain of what's required to perform the task. And so also you don't know what the student requires, because you don't know their mind. Andrew, I can see you want to say something. I'm all open for comments.
I well, I didn't really want to say anything in particular. I maybe just explaining something about the way I think about these issues. I happen to teach a course called Trends and Issues in English language studies, which, by the way, is not just about English language studies. I mean, we're not talking about TESOL specifically. We're talking about all language learning, wherever it happens to be, in whatever language it happens to be in. So that's one thing. Because it sounds like TESOL has the monopoly on knowledge of language education, whereas in fact it doesn't. There's a whole bunch of people in Europe, for example, who are doing studies who may or may not be up to date. That's a different story. But I think they are up to date. And they are hardly ever talked about. We all have literature written in English. Uh, Now, it's written in English for many reasons. One of which is that English has become the main language for science and other forms of communication. But I wanted to express something else, which is yes, we can go and look at trends, and people say, oh well, we started off with grammar translation, and then we had behaviorism, and after behaviorism we had sort of cognitive, and then we had socio-cognitive and sociocultural, and then Vygotsky. And I'm not putting them in any special order. I'm just saying the words. Uh, and then we have magic words like a comprehensible input, and magic words like a scaffolding. So if somebody one day can tell me the difference between scaffolding and helping, I'd be very grateful. Um, I mean, so when you say, "Oh, I'm going to scaffold you," well, what does that mean? Does anybody want to have a try? Wang, you look as though you want to say something.
Yeah. Well, actually, I wrote an article that differentiates between scaffolding and supporting.
Mm-hmm.
But I,
And
but so when you talk about scaffolding, it is like a sequence of support, an iterative, and there is constant interactions between teachers and students. And
mm,
in our field in language learning, well, it is like uh, first of all, you give them a lot of support, and as they
mm,
enhances, you take back support. So, well, while we treat, or I myself treat support at a specific point in in a very in a sequence in a sequence. So scaffolding is like the sequence of support, which
right.
is like changes all the time based on the real situation of the student. But
Mm,
we have to admit that the field is susceptible to a function creep. They put everything into to support and everything to scaffolding. Well, they use the term without any real cautions. They use it because they like it. They say that is new, but that is just like reinventing the wheel. That is not true.
mm. Well, of course, it's not new because scaffolding's been around for decades.
Yeah.
Uh, but people still treat it as though it was new. I think you're right. The reason I raise this is because I think we can sometimes get caught up in the kind of marsh or the weeds of different approaches. I have a different slant on this, which is when I look around, I ask myself, have we actually solved any problems? Have we solved the problem of learning? Have we solved the problem of reading? Have we solved the problem of writing? Um, the multiliteracy is, well, multimodality, of course, is very important. The question is, what do you do with it? Uh, Maisa. um, so the question is, have we been successful? And my answer to the question is no, we have not been successful. And I've looked at, for example, and I keep looking at these things at proficiency levels in uh, in Southeast Asia, uh, and the main countries, well, all of the countries of ASEAN, None of them have progressed over the last, how many years? 11 years. There has been no change, despite the fact that we've brought in experts from all over the world. We've brought in the British Council, we've brought in Relo, we've brought in all these people who were going to change the world. But actually, when you look at things like the EF proficiency ratings, which is now over 2 million people being rated, you suddenly realize that nothing has happened.
So it is
And
called
you want and EF
EFP,
proficiency index. No,
EF
EF.
proficiency index.
Yes. You go and you look it up. It's called education first. EF means education first. And you if you put it into Google EF proficiency index or something like that, it will bring it up immediately and you can have a look at it. But and so although the ranking the numbers of countries examined over the years has increased, uh, we we are we have discovered something else. Okay, Thailand, for example, is number 97 out of 111 countries. Last year, it was number 100. These numbers actually don't mean very much. What's more important is when you look at the proficiency levels, which are identified by the EF group. So, for example, we have very low proficiency, moderate proficiency, and so on. And I'm just mentioning three of them because they're the only ones that apply to this region of the world, right? Thailand has been in very low proficiency and low proficiency for the last 11 years. The same applies to all the countries in the region except for China and Vietnam. Vietnam has now moved to moderate proficiency, and China is also at moderate proficiency. Now, you would think that with a rating of moderate proficiency, you could go somewhere in the street and speak to somebody in English, and you would be moderately able to communicate. The answer is no. That actually doesn't happen, even at the level of very basic stuff like taxi drivers. And I keep coming back to taxi drivers, and I've talked about taxi drivers before, because I think that they're a kind of measure of the sorry, of the general proficiency of people around the place, of ordinary people that the country wants to turn into bilingual speakers of English and another language or their own language. So I think
I would
it's
just,
really quite interesting. Yeah, go on.
I would just come back to this slide. I mean, I've got many of slides of this kind. Like, if you ask about success, Andrew, if after 300 steps that the students year 5 and 6 have gone through, and if this is the text that the experts in multiliteracies, I mean, Derevianka, there is no higher than that. There is Freebody, Derevianka, and Kalansis. It's like the Mavedak
Three,
of the
oh,
method, right? If they think that this is a final draft and it's exquisite texts now after the training, it's not. It doesn't even say it's a review, and it was supposed to be a review. So if we say that this is progress, it was a success of the method which students summarize. And by the way, anyway, so I'm not going to go into this, but basically, if summary is a review, then narrative is a story, and a story is a recount, and the recount is nothing else but just a picture. I mean, how far are we going to dilute it?
yeah.
They see this as a
Well,
success. I wouldn't pass it if my
oh,
undergraduate students produce this. I wouldn't pass it as a review.
okay, I agree. But I'm trying to make a different point. The different point is that when you're faced with a situation where there is no progress, you're faced with a situation that Albert Einstein was talking about, which is, and only a madman would keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome.
Yeah, but I don't think that
And this is,
multiliteracy people see themselves as a failure. I think
I'm not talking about multiliteracy. So I'm not talking about anything. I'm talking about whatever it is that we are doing.
yeah, but we're training
Whatever it
people.
is that we are doing. Well, we're training people, and so we have to ask ourselves what it is that we're training them in, and that's the second step. But whatever it is that we are doing today, it's not working. So we have to, in a way, wipe the slate clean and start again, and look in different places, because we have the problem with the TESOL area and all of the other areas is that they have a tradition of what it is to be a TESOL person, what it is to be a teacher of English or French or Chinese or whatever it is. And those things are not necessarily compatible with progress. Those things are compatible with things like we have to protect the field. The field says that we have to do this and that. Now, I don't know what the field says because, to be honest, systemic functional linguistics in Asia, apart from Indonesia, is not prominent. And that's quite interesting. It just means that the reasons that people select this approach or that approach within Asia and other places, and not just Asia, is that there are personal reasons for making recommendations. So if, for example, you have 20 people who go to the University of Sydney and who become powerful in their system, then systemic functional linguistics happens. SFL is not a big deal in Thailand, nor is it in Vietnam, for example, but it's there. I mean, people know about it, but it's kind of on the edge. And so in the end, what happens is that when you ask people, teachers, and I ask teachers of English, and I ask them every year with amazing results, what do they know? They never know anything. I don't mean that they really don't know anything. I mean, they never say that they know anything, and they never say that they belong to a particular theoretical strand of reflection on language learning. As I said, they always, and I know I've said this again, and I sound like a broken record, but I don't mean to be. But it's always surprising to me. They always come up with two names, Chomsky and Krashen, and then Jeremy, whatever his name is, whose textbook has been photocopied 20 million times in the region, Jeremy Harman. And I'm always stunned by these three names. Now, there has been a little bit more variety recently over the last year, I have to admit, because I've been pushing them to try and think of someone else. But the point I'm trying to make is nobody comes in and says, here is my framework for teaching.
Okay, so I've
Or
written a
here's
paper
my framework
now.
for learning.
Yeah, I've written a paper now, and basically we've analyzed how uh, pre-service teachers and how professionals talk about their job. And
Right.
basically, it's very clear nobody knows how to talk about their job. So that thought came out to me from my research project with early childhood teachers who were in private early childhood centers in Australia. So they were, the cream of the cream, and they were fully aware of some problem they had, which is documentation. And obviously, documenting your teaching, if you don't know how to talk about your job, takes you 2 to 3 years to produce all the file, whereas it would have taken me 10 minutes. So they overwork because they don't know how to talk about their job. And I looked at Peter Freebody's article where he's actually, well, not he, but some of his researchers are interviewing teachers from different levels of schools. They can't talk. So someone said something like, I can't remember. So what was it? Do you teach children something with literacy? I can't remember something about literacy. And he says, no, we're just teaching them how to communicate and how to be attentive in communication and how to break into communication if you want to sort of interrupt us. And I'm thinking, well, that's literacy, bloody hell, it's a definition of literacy. So people don't have abstract reasoning, abstract concepts. They can't talk about it. They don't even have processes for translating what they do or for relating what they do to the curriculum or any other document, another policies or any other frameworks. Basically, people don't know how to talk about they don't understand the work.
Right. But they also don't ask basic questions because they think these questions, in a sense, have been answered, and they feel comfortable in the structures that exist around them. And when I say they feel comfortable, I mean things like, for example, they never ask the question, "What is learning?" I mean, and again, I sound, V will remember this well from our
Well, they've
classes.
worked it out. They've worked it out in the 80s. Learning is basically interaction between teacher and student. It's exactly what Quang was
Well,
saying, it's that
yes,
scaffolding.
yeah.
And where they got it from is like, Middle Ages, I think, but that's what they do. I just wanted, can I so basically terms are not defined. We should follow up with this next time we see each other, so in two
But
weeks.
yeah,
Yeah.
but can I just finish? I I I think that people tend to be comfortable in the discourses that are generated by their teachers, by the TESOL programs, uh, and they have in their heads inevitably a model which says, so if I ask them, so what do you do? How are we going to teach this course? They don't think, oh, well, what's learning or what's teaching? They say things like, what are we going to use as a curriculum model? What are we going to use? What are the objectives of the course? So they focus on those things. They don't focus on the other things. And by doing that, they focus on low level stuff instead of high level stuff. It's very rare to ask questions about the overall intellectual framework of the teaching that we do.
I think we should actually maybe in 2 weeks talk a little bit about or compare, say each of us a concept and how it is done in the literature and how it is done by us for our audiences to actually see the difference. I don't know who's making the noise. Someone is this Andrew? Lala, I don't necessarily, because we're about to finish for today, but Lala, you had mentioned if you've approached the subject of TESOL trends a little bit differently than me, at least in the
Yeah.
beginning. Would you would you just be able to take us on page 2, which is
So,
next, just through the list of things you have found on the market?
hmm. Can I move the
And
slide by
and
myself?
maybe make a comment about your own views on those, if you don't
All right.
mind.
Can
But
I move the slides by myself, Anya? Um, all right. So I think this is a preliminary introduction on some research trends for my students. Actually, well, they can come up with TEL, CALL, task-based language teaching, multilingualism, learner autonomy, global English, and other stuff. But the point I'm trying to make is maybe the new trend that we are now developing in Asia Call is actually supporting learners to learn better. And then we want them to be the actors of the learning. And that's because we want to help them to achieve a higher learning outcome. And then if we, sorry, Anya, can you go further to the next slide? I think
next.
there's a very good publication by OECD in 2018. I think we have to go down. Yes, next please. Next please. Next please. Next please. Next. Yes, I think we have. Can we go back? Yes, I think the third point here is quite remarkable because teachers in the 21st century are expected to become the curriculum engineers in their own context. And that is actually the requirement from the Indonesian government in the context of Curriculum Merdeka or Emancipated curriculum. And I like the third point here. Innovative pedagogies should build on the natural learning inclinations of the students. And I have a feeling that genre-based approach does not actually promote these natural learning inclinations because next slide please, Ania, because it doesn't talk about um, embodied learning. I think when it comes to sensory engagement in learning, the tinkering and the creating, the feeling are the three basic components or essential components in learning. And we have these components in multisensorial load reduction strategies. When my students are working with the Moodle tool, with the verbotonal stuff tool, for example, they can actually do the tinkering by themselves. They have to guess the patterns by themselves. They can count the number of chunks. They can make the recording by themselves without being told what the teachers are saying. And then in dealing with emotions, in dealing with the reading for emotions tool and with aesthetics, it's all about tinkering and feeling. So I think we have these three basic or essential components that are attached in our pedagogical framework. So uh, the notes here say embodied learning refers to pedagogical approaches that focus on non-mental factors involved in learning and the signal and that signal the importance of body and feelings. And I think another stuff from UNESCO says that knowing and feeling cannot be separated. And then from my thesis and from Lukman's thesis, I also learned that it is essential to have the activation of non-verbal components of language. So I think the trend that we are now talking about is focusing on the activation of non mental factors involved in language learning and also non-verbal components of language learning. Maybe that's actually the point I'm trying to make today. Thank you.
So, okay, so we will finish for today. We're
And
past an hour.
if I can just add one little thing.
Sure.
I think we tend to treat learning and language learning as if it were a wholly mental process,
Mm,
a kind of
right.
souls running around in the ether, kind of, we kind of got these ghosts talking to each other, I think. But actually, we are all embodied, and I think the notion of embodiment is critical, and it's critical for two reasons. One of them is that we cannot work without the body. So to ignore the body, either biochemically or biologically, or in terms of um uh, synchronization between language and speech and so on. Sorry, between speech and gesture is doesn't make any sense. The other thing is the realization that however you define the mind, uh, there seems to be a distance between the mind and the body, and we have to bridge that gap, because when I think of something and I want to tell you, I don't do the Vulcan mind meld, as Anya referred to before. What I do is I use representational systems, which are semiotic systems. So we go from the thought, which is complex and perhaps undefinable in terms of language and so on, but maybe influenced by language, maybe influenced by, I'm not saying it isn't. But the thought is complex and undefinable. And I have to represent it using some semiotic system or systems in order for you to have a chance to understand what I'm trying to say. So we go from a pure thought, which is in a sense indefinable, to uh, the restrictions of a semiotic system, which I have to use to talk to you like now. And these things, that is a connection that we rarely study. I mean, we have models, but we actually don't look at how that works, and we keep talking about. I mean, the literature talks about sharing ideas, for example. We don't share anything. I have an idea. I represent it using a semiotic system. And then you, as you listen to it, represent it to yourself on the basis, create a representation on the basis of the signals that I've sent you. So we're not sharing anything. You're constructing something. I've constructed something. I've made a representation of it. You are constructing something on the basis of the representation that I forwarded to you through the air or however. And we kind of hope that the representation in your head and the representation in my head is somehow similar or identical. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible for it to be identical. All I'm saying is it is unlikely to be identical. But and so we get to the point of saying yes. Oh yeah, okay, we agree. What does we agree mean? It means, well, take, and this is it's a shorthand for saying, taking account of the fact that our brains cannot actually know each other intimately, uh, we will act in a similar fashion, because in the end, all of this is confirmed through action. Whether the action is the production of another representation or whatever. So I think that's really important. That the notion of embodiment, and the second notion of embodiment is that there are biological mechanisms that operate that we cannot get around, and we hardly ever talk about. They're physical things and biological things. There's a recent study which has come out on anxiety, and I can't for the life of me find it again. I'll try and find it. It's out of Calico, which was studying anxiety not just from the point of view of how do you feel today? Oh, I feel anxious. Oh no, I don't feel anxious. They've actually done a study of the levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, to see how the body reacted to the notion of anxiety. So it's no longer just an opinion. At least there's now a biological mirroring of the process. And I think that's interesting, and I think it's a step forward. I think we are moving towards, we should be moving towards the stuff that Anya was talking about with Ramachandran and the neuroscientists, rather than creating discourses about the shapes of uh, of genre. Now, the notion of genre is very old. It's way beyond, way before 1987 or whatever, but it's been strengthened since then. The real issue is that a lot of it actually came out of literature, a lot of it came out of linguistics, and these things, linguistics, applied linguistics, and so on, are not necessarily connected with learning. I think they are self-contained. They are self-contained um, sets of constructions and formalisms that people find useful to talk about the thing that they define as language and whatever. And we tend to focus, because we are language people, we define ourselves as language people. We tend to focus on language rather than defining ourselves as learning people, where we should be talking about learning. And I want to make that distinction pretty clearly. Linguistics comes out of people who love language. Love, you know what I mean by
Yeah,
that.
nobody knows that.
Well, but because we love language so much, so we're going to focus on language. So language learning becomes about a story about language, when in fact it should be a story about learning. And the people, and traditionally the people who love language tend not to really connect with the people who talk about education and pedagogy, because somehow it's in a different intellectual realm, and it somehow contradicts each other. I remember at the University of Queensland, we never were very close to each other. We should have been in each other's pockets, actually, but we weren't. I'll stop there, because I think that these are important distinctions that we tend not to make.
So we've raised some questions, but I would like actually upcoming scholars and current scholars to actually review for themselves. We've given you some sort of systems that we use, some questions we ask, and actually we try to push the field through these discourse, through these podcasts. We're trying to push the field to the new boundary. We want to try to push the boundary to move to new areas, to what they call innovation or to development, because that's the only way we have a future. Otherwise we will be reduced to basically a training institution teaching teachers how to teach vocabulary, and we just go not just backwards, we'll go fundamentally backwards. Now, can someone turn off the mic, please, or hearing aid or whatever it is, audio? So I hope that was useful. Um, Andrew, okay, good. I hope it was useful and that you got some systems and that you can use them now. Obviously, these systems are a shortcut for you. They took us years to invent. Now, it doesn't mean that the answers will come but easily, but that's what's called research, right? And we will be here for you in 2 weeks. And also, if you have any questions, you can always contact us through Facebook or email. Thank you so much, everybody, and see you in 2 weeks. Thank you very much, V. I know you've prepared something, but I didn't have your PowerPoint, so I just wanted to. That's all we had so for today, but we will continue with that subject in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
thank you, Lisa, for your questions.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye, everyone.